So good morning to everyone who decided to attend this event in person, and greetings to those watching online. I thank the Morung Lecture team for inviting me to their 21st lecture to engage with this topic, at the end of which you will hopefully present me with your generous brickbats. I also thank the Lighthouse Church for agreeing to share their facilities with us. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the historical work of all news media in Nagaland, their founders, editors, journalists, non-journalists, administration, press, and other workers who have built and put in print the terrain of struggle inhabited by the people of Nagaland. Though faced with immense challenges, the journalists and all these workers I've been talking about have led the way in democratic and industrial practice, even if on a small scale. Today's session is titled very broadly, Learning from the Terrain of Struggle, Building Power, Challenging Boundaries, Activism, Journalism, and Scholarship. I have borrowed the term terrain of struggle from the scholar Sandy Grand, who has applied it to relate critical pedagogy to Native American socio-political thought in a book she published in 2004. I today will not be lecturing any of you on how to go about doing any of the stated items on the title here, but share reflections for about 30 minutes on how my own engagement with and the study of a specific institution helped me traverse the terrain on which knowledge is built in our times. In its theoretical elements, this lecture will draw from my PhD research process and outcomes, making this an opportunity also for me to share my research with all of you. This lecture contains a mix of few easy and a few difficult to convey messages. So I request you all to make notes wherever necessary so that you can engage with the topic later during the discussion, and it will keep you also not falling asleep during the next 30 minutes. As you have heard from Ari before, thanks Ari for the introduction. My name is Aheli Moitra, and I will take you through my journalistic and doctoral journey over the past few years to give body to what emerged as a result of years of collaboration with a space that brings together three modes of engagement with the world: activism, journalism, and scholarship, and also plugs you, the audience, in through the physical object of a newspaper. So then, this newspaper that I refer to today is the Morung Express, that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. The Morung Lectures have been conducted under the aegis of this institution since 2016, and it is to the credit of this very institution that someone who participated in organizing the initial set of Morung Lectures can today find themselves delivering one of them. I'm referring to me. I was organizing some of the Morung Lectures before, but now I'm at this place where I've been trained to also be able to deliver a lecture like this. For the audience that does not read the newspaper, and for those of you who may see this as a promotion of one newspaper over others, I request you to bear with me. Though the Morung Express is a specific case I address, the broader points I make may be relevant to think about other news media and other things unfurling in our near and farther neighborhoods in the contemporary world, everywhere. I will address today some of the ways in which knowledge is produced and how being a partial insider to a newsroom and later a partial outsider to academia, working between boundaries, challenged my understanding of journalism and pushed my work as a research scholar. That said, let me risk a preliminary introduction of the Morung Express. This newspaper called the Morung Express was started by a triad of activists who brought together the powers they harnessed from their groundwork with institutions such as Naga People's Movement for Human Rights, the Naga Students Federation, and the International Alliance of Indigenous and Tribal Peoples of the Tropical Forests. Established in 2005, the Morung Express contributed a new cog to the news media wheel in Nagaland. That has been traced back to 1932, the news media in Nagaland itself. But the Morung Express was also an addition to the historical continuity of Naga activism that had put up robust fights against the unrelenting human rights abuse perpetrated by the state since 1956. And much before that, I'm talking about the post-colonial state in this case. This, the human rights activists did through consistent engagement and interventions on several scales, including activism from the streets, to the courts, to international forums. Journalism, and a kind with the intent to be an alternative to the status quo, was the mode through which questions universal to all human species being, question of basic needs and interests, as well as those specific to where the Nagas found themselves at the particular historical juncture, was sought to be addressed through all these scalar attempts at activism that the activists made, including combination of that with journalism. Starting from the question of what is to be done, the newspaper's mottos include "Speak Truth to Power," as you can see from a poster and a sticker that they printed in the past decade, as also the power of truth. In line with, and in addition to this, several trained journalists who follow the universal standards of journalism form part of their news team, as also do scholars who are specialized in research training. By locating my own journey with the Morung Express, I will attempt today to take you through the ways in which our work together may be understood as an example of going beyond stiff insider and outsider boundaries, and how my continuing work as a research scholar helped me conceptualize the ways in which we may understand how news media has the potential to build this power that the Morung Express openly asserts. Let me quickly address my position now in relation to the Morung Express. With a bachelor's degree in mass media and journalism, my master's degree brought my attention to international humanitarian laws and human rights, leading me to write a dissertation in 2006 on India's role in keeping distance from the International Criminal Court. Thereafter, I worked in the capacity of a researcher at a think tank in Mumbai, and later as a researcher at the South Asia Forum for Human Rights. This is where I learned about the work of the Naga People's Movement for Human Rights, as indeed the Naga Movement for Self-Determination and Sovereignty. In 2011, through the insightful and inclusive politics of the Morung Express and their peers, I came to Nagaland to work with the newspaper on an experimental basis. The first piece I wrote for the newspaper was published as a guest editorial on 6th August 2011, and addressed my own struggles with engaging with what home meant in the life of a migrant. By 2012, our collaboration had really worked out quite well in various kinds of ways, and I began to report more regularly for the Morung Express. In its newsroom, as hopefully with newsrooms everywhere, birth origins did not order our interactions. My relations with different people at the Morung Express was sometimes based on common interest, sometimes on common experiences of class, sometimes hierarchical, sometimes argumentative, and often trying to understand our differences in upbringing and lived experiences. We were ultimately professionals in a news industry, worked with current issues, and related with each other accordingly. The leadership and the workers took great care to keep the team, however diverse in our politics, together and in engagement with one another. From picnics to birthday parties to, you can see here we were at a colleague's child's birthday party, to different events like these, like the Morung Lectures. The Morung team really moved together as comrades. In 2009, a new opportunity came by which required me to take this very long journey to the north of the globe. I had applied for a PhD position at UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, in the high north city of Tromsø, and got a position there as a research scholar for 4 years. As a journalistic practitioner, my work proposed to theorize the work of the Morung Express, and particularly the ways in which it covered issues around indigeneity and religion. Life was rather different at UiT than it was in Nagaland. Covered in thick snow for 8 out of 12 months, the initial battles included getting integrated into the largely opaque and serpentine administrative systems of a new country and university. Though I was given a whole office to myself, it proved to be frustrating, as I had always worked as a part of a team. Working individually meant I could potentially kill many hours procrastinating, now that I was accountable only to myself, but of course I had ever watchful supervisors at all times. During the time that I spent up north being trained as an academic researcher, I also had the opportunity to visit the University of Edinburgh and work with the likes of Professor Arkotong Longkumer. I couldn't find a photo with him, but this was a photo that Professor Longkumer took in his front yard, because I went to his house very often and pork and rice meals were never far away from me, so I never felt I was away from home at any point. During this research time, personal changes also happened. My dear little nephew was born in the humming buzz of Brooklyn in New York. All of that aside, it was the research training itself that was so rigorous that it left me in this zombie-like stage at the end of it by the time I delivered my PhD dissertation in January of 2024 and then defended it successfully in March 2024. My thesis was finally titled The Morung Express, Naganess, Indigeneity and Religion. This is the cover page of my thesis. You can actually scan this code if you want and it'll take you to the website directly and you can download the PDF copy of my thesis from there if you want to read it. So just go ahead and scan it on your phone and it'll take you to the website directly. Download it later, read it if you like, don't read it if you don't like. That's up to you. The study itself focuses on the year 2020 to 2023. Analyzing the content that the newspaper published in the year 2020, analyzing, the COVID year, the first year of COVID that happened. And between 22 and 23, I took that analysis back to the journalists and asked them about how they thought of the work that they did, journalists, editors, and founders of this newspaper. And I asked them what did they think about this material that they produced, what happened during COVID, how did they conceptualize the newspaper? How did they conceptualize the work that they did? Please keep these categories in mind as we go ahead, because I'll be referring to Naganess, indigeneity, and religion again and again over the next few minutes. Later, when you look at the thesis, if you do, you will realize that I had a number of advantages in conducting this sort of research, having been a partial insider to the newsroom. I, for instance, had a closer understanding of news cycles here than other scholars may have had, but only as much as my journalist colleagues also have in Nagaland. In research terms, though, this helped me develop a disciplined thematic comparison of different events and issues that occur throughout the year in a newspaper like this in the local scenario, and helped me classify the data into themes like calendars and prohibitions. These are the two big, large categories of things I studied in in the content of 2020. We can talk about this later if you're interested. I will not go too much into it. I was studying only 1 year of the newspaper, so this is a very narrow cross-section, but that still enabled me to say something general in terms of articulations that the newspaper has taught us over the years. And then over the years, I had developed a network that was way beyond my professional realms of journalism. Many people became my family and friends, developing trust and comradeship with each other. Reading about Nagas when I went and started doing academic research as suggesting mystified essential cores to their human being made me deeply uncomfortable, having known the diverse networks, ideologies, mechanisms, institutions, and classes that informed who the Nagas are in the world. In the discipline of indigenous religions that my PhD work was located in, Naga-ness was often related to only a few and fixed ways in which people claim themselves or their related environment to be Naga. The essentializing notion of Naga-ness seemed to me the connecting and grounding point of further investigation. Not because Naga-ness is effervescent, but just the opposite. It is something specific, but also relational and historical in the world. Norms related to Naga-ness are often challenged and shift over time. If you follow the newspaper, you will see. What kinds of shifts are these? Who brings up these shifts? For what purposes do they challenge certain existing norms? What are the myriad structures that operate in Nagaland today that may be studied through the public arena of the newspaper by using Naga-ness as an analytical category of understanding, keeping it as open as possible? These questions propelled my research on. It is important to mention here that academic objectivity also entailed thinking about the power I held as an Indian journalist and now academic in Nagaland working on Naga issues. The history of political relations between the Naga and Indian polities has been marked by the unjust and unacknowledged use of brute force. Indian armed forces, as representatives of the government of India and Nagaland for many decades, have militarized and torn up Naga lives and society with complete impunity. The power imbalance these actions have given rise to has crept into almost every institutional, social, and sometimes institutional relations between the Nagas and Indians. This power imbalance came up often as I reported the news in Nagaland, but also enabled me to be as critical as possible, giving me that distance. This, while Naga journalists often face backlash from the state, the non-state, but also their own communities as insiders to various categories like the tribe, alongside being journalists. Safety for journalists in Nagaland is unheard of, and the profession has never become financially stable for those who want to participate in this democratic endeavor. In this sea of uncertainty, my secure caste and class Indianness gave me many degrees of certainty, as also a few gender-based challenges. How these power imbalances have implicitly informed my research is something that my former journalist colleagues and others who read the thesis can point out best. So what advantages did all of what I have stated before bring to the analysis of the material I identified in the Morung Express? I was able to conceptualize what kind of a public sphere the Morung Express may be, and some of the historical and contemporary conditions it inhabits and reproduces. The term Morung in the Morung Express became key to much of this analysis. When I first joined this newspaper, I had been told that the term itself means a school, understood to be located in a pre-colonial past and in almost every Naga village, the Morung was described to be centrally located in the villages where they were and worked as a site where the labor, art, culture, rituals, social activities needed to sustain the community were conducted as well as imparted to young people. With the entry of colonial, capitalist, and post-colonial forces into the Naga areas, the Morung was both identified as a system and pushed out systematically. In 2005, when the human rights activists instated this newspaper, they meant for it to reflect this Morung history, but also connected it with their human rights activism. Morung then came with a new, indeed renewed potentials. As the Morung Express, with the express added to the Morung to signify progressive motion, it was articulated as a modern site of pedagogy or co-learning between contributors, journalists, non-journalists, and readers. Thus, the newspaper, which terms itself an alternative news media in India and Nagaland, I'm sorry, I forgot to put this. Thus, the newspaper, which terms itself as an alternative news media in India and Nagaland, publishes exclusive news and features on notions they see related to, for instance, decolonization. What does this include? This includes articles that draw from Christian news sites, like Christianity Today, for instance, that speak about freedom, justice, peace, but also drawing from indigenous news sites like Cultural Survival that raise awareness around, for instance, the effects of climate change that other indigenous peoples elsewhere in other parts of the world and how they organize around these issues. This sort of news is also available to be read in the Morung Express. Even while reporting the local news, the newspaper extensively publishes articles that pose contrarian viewpoints on important local issues. In no small part, these form the negotiations or struggles around which the understanding of Naganess, indigeneity, or religion is built and challenged, showing how rules are set around them, how they are to be used, by whom, under what occasions, and with what pushback or resistance. There is no linear speaking of an assumed truth to a further assumed power. The newspaper shows a keen understanding of the powerlessness from which indigenous peoples as a global network of solidarity have been pushed to start off from. This powerlessness is not the same for the Sami people in Norway, for example, as it is for the Naga people, given each of their specific local context. Yet there is much to be learned about how to fight a system of oppression that is sponsored by the market in collaboration with the state, that is implemented globally, that must also be fought back through global coalitions, but also through contextually specific pathways to power. This is the terrain that enabled the study of the Morung Express as a site of struggle, wherein international and national rights activism is brought together with journalism to stress political control of the people over their lives and liberties. This, then, is not just a static site, but one that is defined by change, not just in the body of the printed text, having published for daily almost for 15 years now, but also how contributors have reworked their ideas in tangible printed text around important public issues over the years. From this, we have learned the struggles through which something comes to be legitimated as knowledge, through whose interventions, with what limitations, and so on. The struggle entailed here includes editorial decision-making in the newsroom, where you will find editors and journalists disagreeing with each other at all times. While making the news, this internal buzz is also influenced by external factors like existing press laws in India, the political incarceration of journalists throughout the country, the local community control over what comes to be published and what cannot be published on a public platform, how the market, capital, state, and technology determines which newspaper can survive and which cannot. At the Morung Express, all this is also kept in relation with external factors like global indigeneity, as Nagas participate on UN platforms like the External Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and derive their notion of rights from what is also available to, say, the Sami in Norway or the Santhal in West Bengal. The Morung Express, in that sense, is a great source to study both local and global processes that shape our world, our identities, and our politics. So then, taking this further, I use Prabir Purkayasta's notions around technology and science, and I propose the newspaper's published works to enable the formation of knowledge as commons. What I meant by this term was that the newspaper not only publishes information on what traffic rules apply on any given day, or what measures to take while in the middle of a pandemic, but is an important resource on what may be understood or determined as belonging, as indigeneities, as religions, as how they are practiced and asserted in relevant ways in today's day and age, or what are festivals in today's Naga context, who celebrates them, for what reasons, and so on. But also, how do we resist and negotiate power as it is today, often barely visible, but sometimes a shooting pain on a hospital bed that doesn't exist? What kind of institutions come together and rally, when, on what issues, against whom? The term knowledge here is used to refer to this sort of discourse of what is considered or made legitimate to speak about, be acted upon, or meant in a certain time and space. Through the newspaper, this knowledge becomes a resource available to everyone who can access it. It showcases the ways in which various actors participate in making public discourse, and the knowledge this generates as a commons, as a resource that belongs to everyone, that everybody owns and can use and reuse potentially infinitely. What you see in final print as a newspaper and the knowledge it produces does not appear magically or even spontaneously. It is a product of the capital, both financial and ideological, that is invested by its founders, the labor of knowledge workers like journalists who work in close contact with graphic designers, printing press workers, distributors, hawkers, administrators, drivers, maintenance staff, and others. This work is sustained through revenue mechanisms like government advertisements. These potentially infinitely shareable commons or knowledge commons are produced through a struggle not just of ideas that determine, say, how prohibitions are to be contested or supported, but also how journalists and non-journalists co-labor to intervene on public politics of our times. What kind of old systems break down and decay? What kind of new systems emerge and through what kind of revolutions? The newspaper is a living, dynamic archive that may help us answer some of these questions if only we take it very seriously instead of waiting for Godot. In any case, I will not torment you further with these very dense formulations. What I have attempted today to do is reflect on some of the ways in which practices of activism and journalism, put together with tools provided by the academy, brought fruitful new directions in thinking about existing structures in Nagaland. Perhaps these help challenge majoritarian notions related to the ways in which we relate to each other and possibly build people's power to be able to understand their situation better, identify contradictions, intervene at the right points, and affect change in ways that lay the basis for further struggles for equality and justice. With that, I thank you all for sitting through this presentation. If things have been unclear, it is because I have not been able to convey them properly, so ask any questions you would like to. And if you have any points that you think of that you want to write to me about, that you think about later, you are most free to write to me at aheli.moitra@gmail.com. So thank you very much again for sitting through this.